All the trajectory has been very good in terms of bilateral trade and investment. We've had large increases in bilateral trade over the years. In the last year, in 2017, we hit an all-time high, roughly $126 billion of bilateral trade, and that's goods and services. In fact, during the course of this year, 2018, we've seen increases in U.S. exports. This is in sectors like energy and defense trade. And we've seen a reduction in the trade deficit during that period as well. And certainly trade deficits reflect a variety of factors that contribute to them. But there are a variety of problems to solve. Most recently, we've been very engaged with the GSP review, the review under the Generalized System of Preferences program in the United States. A lot of intensive negotiation, and that's been a tremendous experience, even though during my time in the role, we were not quite able to reach agreement. Hopefully, my successors and the political leadership at USTR, working with Ministry of Commerce counterparts, can reach agreement, ideally in the next weeks or months. Well, separately, the Trump administration introduced some changes in the administration of the program. These were announced last year. Essentially, USTR, working with the interagency team, is now conducting annual reviews of all beneficiary countries to assess to what extent they meet the criteria for eligibility. It's on a 3-year cycle, 2018 being the first year. The focus has been on Asian beneficiaries. Next year, it will be on Latin American and Middle East beneficiaries. And then finally, the third year on African beneficiaries. So part of this new annual review, USTR did decide to self-initiate a review across the board on the market access criterion. So simultaneously with accepting petitions on medical devices and on dairy, USTR self-initiated more broadly on the market access criterion.
Can you forecast, are you willing to forecast what the outcome of the India review might be, or is that perhaps a little hard to do at this point?
Well, I will forecast in a very optimistic way, because this is what I fervently hope for, and that is there will be an agreement in the near future. There have been strong efforts on both sides to reach agreement on a limited number of issues, and there are issues on both sides, on both the U.S. side and on the Indian side. So ideally, there will be a package in the near future, and as a result, the review will be concluded, and we will have a new agreement on which we can build for the future.
This is an agreement covering a number of topics besides GSP, or are we just talking about the GSP?
Largely GSP, and that is addressing, for example, some agricultural priorities, certainly the medical devices issue. There have been some issues with respect to information technology tariffs and something called the compulsory registration order, but it's also encompassed the possibility of an exemption for India under the Section 232, the tariffs on steel and aluminum. That's been a priority for India as well.
Of course, yeah. Now, just final thing on GSP. One figure sort of suggested that Indian exports that benefit from GSP only represent about 11% of total Indian exports to the US. So does that mean it's more symbolic than economically important, having GSP?
I wouldn't say it's more symbolic, but it certainly is symbolic, as well as dollars and cents or rupees in terms of a trade. I mean, $5.6 billion is a significant proportion of trade. But
Yeah.
there's no doubt that there's some symbolic, there's a symbolic dynamic to this as well.
Yeah. Well, let me move on. As you know, of course, the current administration is quite keen on free trade agreements, particularly bilaterals. Do you see any prospect of a free trade agreement between the U.S. and India in the near or even medium-term future?
Certainly not in the near term, and neither side has really proposed that at this point in time. And frankly, I think unlikely in the medium term. In fact, each side has more immediate priorities. Again, this effort to negotiate a package associated with the GSP review. India certainly has prioritized the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. In many respects, we are just learning how to negotiate with one another bilaterally. There's been increased engagement and quite intensive engagement over this past year, and that's a very positive development. In the long term, I don't see a better alternative than the aspiration of negotiating a free trade agreement. As policymakers, we have no better tool to truly liberalize trade and realize the potential for increasing trade and investment. So I hope that's where things will lead over time.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts at all about the state of play with RCEP, which of course India is a major component, but I've heard just reading the press that India is having some difficulties with RCEP, and I wonder, from your point of view, if you have any comments on that or any thoughts.
Sure. I'm certainly no expert, but have followed developments over the last few years. It has been an important negotiation, and certainly an interesting counterpart to the TPP agreement. Frankly, I'm skeptical about whether the RCEP can be concluded during the course of 2019, which now seems to be the plan. RCEP ministers were in Singapore recently. They issued a joint statement. They highlighted that I think 7 chapters of the negotiation have been concluded. Issues like SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, customs, SMEs. But frankly, that's the low-hanging fruit. And the difficult issues are still to be resolved. Frankly, market access, tariffs on goods, and access for services. And those are very sensitive areas. I recognize that there's a lot of sensitivity on the part of India with respect to China and tariffs, and understandably so. India has perennially been running a trade deficit with China, and that's been a matter of some concern for India, as I've heard from counterparts. And services, that's a high priority for India. Yeah, it's difficult for many of the other countries in terms of movement of a person. So it's good luck to them, but I'm skeptical in terms of the prospects for concluding in 2019.
And you mentioned TPP. Is there any interest that you're aware of on the part of India of joining the TPP at some point?
I certainly have heard nothing from counterparts. I don't recall reading any press, any real analysis that or predictions that India is likely to be a candidate to join the TPP 11 anytime soon.
Anything else you want to add on the overall sort of U.S.-India trade picture?
The only thing I would add is this effort that we've been engaged in during the course of 2018 to do a bilateral deal. It's not potentially a large deal. It's addressing some specific irritants, but it could be a platform for building new successes in the future. For example, really taking on some of the challenges associated with services. And I am a bit concerned about some of the developments with respect to digital trade. There have been a number of US companies, and I've even heard from some Indian companies about trends towards data localization. So that's, I think, an issue to be tackled in the future. But one step at a time, and this kind of incremental work can lead to a bigger effort down the road, ideally an FTA negotiation.
And it sounds from what you're saying, Mark, that the sort of the atmosphere between the Indian government officials and the US ones is very positive in terms of trying to reach solutions to these issues.
I think it's been very positive at all levels. I mean, the challenges are difficult, and as a consequence, there's not been agreement yet. But from the level of ministers, Ambassador Lighthizer and Minister Prabhu, to the deputy level and to the negotiator level, it's been a very constructive atmosphere, and I think hard efforts being made by both sides.
Well, that's a very good note to end this particular segment. So thank you.
The lessons that we learn as negotiators in terms of being careful about chasing another country in terms of reaching a deal, about negotiating with yourself on those basics. But I think being persistent, being patient, being able to be in listening mode are all very important. And if a deal's not coming together, being ready to give it a pause, to walk away. I mean, those are all important, but always keeping in mind the ultimate objective. That's to get to an outcome. We're not negotiating for the fun of it. I've enjoyed my career so much in terms of being a negotiator. It's really to get to an outcome that all sides feel good about. That can be a positive measure of progress among countries, whether multilaterally or bilaterally.
Yeah, Steve Landy, who is an old-time trade negotiator, you may remember, he told me once that he'd done a negotiation. He called USTR Strauss, his boss, and apologized for not getting a better deal. And Strauss said, Steve, you don't want to get an A+ for you, because that means the other side's going to get a D, and that's not going to be a good future. Go for a B+. And it seems to me that's a useful lesson that you.
That is. That's
so
a very good way to put it.